The Know Your Gear podcast.
Over what the top 5 amps, according to Reverb, were that sold, okay? In order, so 1 to 5, okay? So this is the number 1 selling was the Quad Cortex. Now, let me just read them and then I'll go back through them. Quad Cortex, number 1, Positive Grid Spark, number 2, but it said Positive Grids Spark. So again, if we're talking about the Spark Mini Micro and the full size, the 1 and the 2, everything combined, it kind of looks like they're just capturing by that SKU. I don't know. Line 6 Helix, yes, if you're noticing, they're using the amp modelers as amps as well. Universal Audio's aux box, okay, which is important because that's basically an attenuator. And then the Boss Katana. Okay, so that's the top 5. So let's talk about a couple things. First of all, again, reports are very interesting because we don't know percentages, okay? So here's a good example. I saw on their top guitar sales report, it said like Fender was number 1, and then it was Gibson, and then it was like Epiphone, and then it's like, I think it was something, and then Squier. Okay, now think about this. It's very possible that Fender alone was, let's say it was 40% of all items sold on Reverb for guitars. That's just in theory, right? So, and then the next SKU down, it goes to 20%. So by the time that you get to the end of the list, you could be talking about, it would be nice to know the percentages. Just that's what I'm basically getting at. Because it gives me like more reference, like Quad Cortex sold the most, but I don't have an idea of like volume, how comparably different Quad Cortex went to Spark. So in other words, did Quad Cortex sell 1 more unit than the Sparks combined, and then the Sparks sold 2 more units than Line 6. Again, that would just help you kind of understand where the value proposition is. There's a couple things I want to point out about that list before we go any further. If you don't mind, I'm going to go to YouTube and I'm going to type in, I stopped using amps. And I want to show you how funny this is. I'm going to share this with you. Let me go here. I think web. Okay, let me move this over a little bit that way. Okay, so here's what I want to show you. So we have Michael. Michael I met at the Sweetwater. He was a very nice guy. He did a video called Why Guitar Players Stop Using Tube Amps. This was 2 years ago. Okay. They did why players start using amp modelers. Oh, why start amp modelers? We have you didn't need a guitar amp. You don't need a guitar amp. Here's a video. You don't need a guitar amp. We have Stay Metal Ray, which is Raymond. He's like, I stopped using tube amps. Stop using amp sims. Try this. Basically, I want to go through. We need tube amp purists, but let's talk about it. What I remember in the last couple of years, 13 Reasons Why Amp Sims Destroy Real Amps. That's by Glenn. Basically, if we go through, and then already it's off the rails because it's pulling other data, more other videos. What I remember in the last 2 years was a massive amount of YouTubers saying, I'm stopping using tube amps. And then I'm like, what's interesting is, I'm not saying YouTubers created the market that you see here, but I mean, definitely these are communities, and your community, I want to say the leaders. They're not the leaders of the community, but they're definitely they get to grab the most attention and eyeballs. I saw a lot of videos. And I take notice of that because of a different reason than probably you guys. I take notice because I'm like, when you see every YouTuber going, I got rid of all my amps and I'm only using effects processors, and they're getting massive views, you go, well, if I'd make that video, I'll get massive views too. Unfortunately, in my case, I couldn't justify that title because I'm not in that place right now. So I think that's part of it. So we talked about the fact that people are using modelers now more than ever. They're very useful and they're very good. I'm shocked about the Quad Cortex, although because it's a $1,700 unit, it's hard to think that the $1,700 unit outsold, a Positive Grid Spark amp or a Katana. But it was the hottest thing, and I would say whatever is the newest thing at the moment is going to get massive amounts of attention and sales. Or again, they could be churning them, people buying and flipping their Quad Cortexes because they're frustrated with them. Those are all factors in this. And I say all this because I just want to make sure we're all on the same page with what we're talking about. I don't think. By the way, for those that are curious, the only tube amp to make any list on there was the Vox AC15, was number 23. So no Hot Rod Deluxes, no Blues Juniors. I would say, I think this falls exactly in line with what I've been saying for the last 2 years, which is I think what's going to happen is high-end tube amps, quality tube amps are going to become even more valuable, a la Amplified Nation, a la the new hand-wired, Bad Cat, a la, Friedman amps, amps that are, and that's just a few. I mean, we can go on, 2Rock, you name it, just keep going down the road, where literally you're going to see players going, look, I can build a giant pedal board and throw it in front of a Hot Rod Deluxe and haul all this to a place, or I can just take a Quad Cortex or a Kemper or a Helix. We definitely see that as a trend. It's because at some point it's like, okay, it's not how good is a tube amp versus a modeler. It's how much different is 15 pedals in front of a basic level tube amp. I was just talking about this literally before I even knew about this report. I was just talking about the fact that a lot of people don't seem to know that on a Hot Rod Deluxe, the way it works, again, from selling them, this is what I remember, was they make 2 amps, the Blues Deluxe and the Hot Rod Deluxe. And the main difference between the two is the Hot Rod Deluxe has 2 power tubes and a preamp tube, right? And so I'm trying to think what that's called. As a phase inverter, I'm sorry. So it has a preamp tube for a phase inverter. I mean, keep in mind, I'm not a tube tech, an amp tech, and I'm not versed in this stuff. I just, believe it or not, Fender put out a training manual on how to sell these amps. So I just remember it from the manual. The Hot Rod Deluxe has, again, 2 power tubes and a preamp tube as a phase inverter for those 2 power tubes. So it's not aside to the preamp channel. Then it has 1 preamp tube for the reverb. And then it has 1 preamp tube for the drive side of the preamp, the second channel. The first part of the Hot Rod Deluxe, if I recall, and I could be right. Now, I could be incorrect, but I'm pretty sure this feels right because I'm doing it on memory. The clean channel on a Hot Rod Deluxe does not have a tube in the preamp. The Blues Deluxe, if you're familiar with that one, it looks just like the Hot Rod Deluxe, but it's tweed, has the same thing. It has 2 power tubes with a preamp tube as a phase inverter, 1 preamp tube for the reverb, and 1 preamp tube assigned to the clean channel, interesting enough. And that was a big difference. So a lot of players like the Hot Rod Deluxe because it's really clean. It's probably because it's really like more solid state clean on that side, but it's running through a 2 power section. And that's maybe how they're keeping the amp so clean. It's possible. But again, if you're looking for that high-end, hand-wired boutique amp, the Hot Rod Deluxe is a different kind of animal. It's great. It's actually one of my favorite amps, but it's a different animal. So this is what I'm saying about, the players are going, hey, do I really need this if I can run, an FR speaker and a modeling product? I'm not shocked about anything on the list. So, I don't think I saw where, Rhett and the guys were talking about, they think the pendulum can swing back and people will get into tube amps. I think that's not going to be the case. What I mean by that is I think there'll be a smaller group community who's into tube amps and they'll stay into tube amps, and some people will kind of come back over to the fold. But these kind of things have an effect where they drive up the price of tube amps. Hand-wired tube amps are getting super expensive. They're super small quantity now, and they're super, super expensive. And this is only going to make them more expensive because I happen to know, I'm going to tell the story that I just can't say who, but just trust me on this. In 2020, in January, so I'm going to give you as many I'm just going to give you every detail I can, but the name that said it. In 2020, in January, I got to interview Steve I, and so this will kind of lead in a couple things. And I was at this event, and when I was at the event, I was talking to a person I respect in this industry who builds tube amps, guitar amps, lots of them. So again, you can make all kinds of speculations. It won't matter who. He specifically, I'm going to tell you why. I said, hey, would you do a podcast with me? I would really like to talk about the industry and tube amps and how your business model works and why it's working for you. And he said, no, I'm really not into doing that. So that's why I'm not giving his name and stuff specifically. But what he said to me was really powerful considering it was 5 years ago. He said, Look, the biggest problem in the tube industry, the amp industry right now, this is 5 years ago, is Marshall and Fender would come out with an amp and they'd ride that design for 10 years. A Plexi, sell that for 10 years. Then when it slows down, make an 800. Sell that for 10 years. That slows down, make a 900. That slows down, make a 2000. Fender doing the same thing. Sell tweeds. Those slow down in sales, go to black faces. Those sell down, go to, silver face. Changing the design every 10 years. Famous builders like Mike Soldano build a amp like an SLO 100 and they ride it for 2 decades. All the R&D and design, they could add a new model every once in a while. They can make a tweak to it, but essentially they're selling through. He says in 2000, this is 5 years ago, in 2020, he said the biggest problem in 2020, he goes, I have to design an amp almost every 6 months. And then I have to make a huge marketing blitz to promote that amp. And the amp sales skyrocket and then just dead stop. And then I'm back to the drawing board. We're designing new amps again. And he goes, this is not the kind of product that is designed to do that. He goes, sourcing tubes is getting harder by the day, much less the year and the decade. Sourcing parts is getting to be more difficult. He's like, shipping them is extremely expensive and difficult. He's like, everything about this is just choking and crushing the tube industry and the tube amp industry. And he's like, and just the fact that I got to basically start thinking about the fact that I'm going to have to come out with a product every quarter is just insane. And he goes, and that's his biggest obstacle. And in 2020, I thought that was an interesting conversation, and I really kind of like stuck with me, as you can imagine. But to watch it unfold year after year, and now 5 years later, looking back and listening to that speech, you can see exactly what the problem is, right? The only way they can really do that, coming up with a new product every quarter, you see the amp companies that do it, they're essentially repurposing products. They're just repackaging. Well, I shouldn't repurposing is a good word, but repackaging. So it's in other words, it's like, oh, it's the same product, but now we just threw a different color on it, trying to do some excitement. Or the companies that are not true tube, in other words, there's a little solid state in there, digital, and they can keep changing that out. So that's the problem. And now if you look at the modelers that are out there, look at what they're doing. They're constantly going, hey, here's 20 new amp packs for you. Download these. Here, we're updates, more stuff. So they can keep refreshing. So people can go, well, I didn't buy the, Axe FX yet, but now that it has, I didn't know. Now it has the Mesa Boogie pack, or now it has the this pack, and now I'm interested. Maybe I'll buy one. That's a product they've already developed, but they can keep selling almost as it's new. It's an update, right? Because it's getting updates. And then I'm not saying it's easy to make that technology, the modeling technology. By the way, I don't want anybody to take away any kind of weird thing just from one part of it, what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is this is what's going to hurt the tube amp industry the most, is all the things I just said. And I think the way this will work is, it's not that I think that they'll make less tube amps, like each company will make less tube amps. I think there's just going to be a lot less tube amp companies. I think that the ones that do it the best, the ones that when you plug into them and you have a holy crap moment when you plug in that amp, like to me, the death of the tube amp is I plug into one. As somebody who reviews them, let me tell you what the death is. It's the worst experience you could ever have. I plug in the amp and I go, it's nice. It's dead. If it's not, wow, why am I playing a Kemper when this exists? That's the only thing that keeps a tube amp alive in the future market, in my opinion. If it doesn't feel and sound and look amazing and doesn't inspire you on every way, then yeah, I'm going modeling. And I'm doing both. And I think everybody will do both. But I also think that's also what's going to drive it down. So where you see I've seen it already, where you see lots of not amp channels, okay? Like, guitar amp channels that review nothing but guitar amps. They always have piles and piles of amps, right? It's just insane. It's like all the guitars behind me, but all amps. Notice though, the channels that are not so much amp channels, they're just gear channels in general. Maybe they do everything, or maybe they do, like me, mostly guitars, but they also dive into amps and pedals. Notice how the wall of amps is disappearing to just the few that they really, really like. Because it's not that I don't want a lot of amps. It's just like, I'm like, no, I need a few that can't be profiled right, or a few that can't be, I play my Axe FX or I play my Kemper, and they're great. And when I want something more, I grab something a little bit more. So that's my 2 cents on the list. Oh, he says, I think part of what shows the Reverb data is people don't want to ship amps and would rather put them on a Facebook marketplace. That's a great, Enrico, that's a really great thing. And they did talk about shipping amps. I will tell you, I talked about this. I sold a couple of amps and shipped them, and I had trouble with a couple of them. Like half the amps I shipped had issues, where people are like, oh, it got damaged in shipping or something. I currently have a pile. I told you guys I have a pile of amps to get rid of, and they're just down in my guest room. And same thing, I don't want to ship them either. So you're actually making a great point that we're probably not seeing a lot of shipping of amps on Reverb. Just look, they ship so much stuff now. Not only the price is expensive, which is crazy, but the stuff just gets drop kicked and stuff. It just can't take the abuse. So that's definitely a factor too. I definitely agree. I keep thinking all my amps that I'm going to get rid of are going to end up in some kind of trade to a music store or something, because there's just no way I can sell them. I keep thinking about it, but it's like you said, it's a pain. So if you like this clip and you'd like to watch another one, you can click right here. And if you want to see the entire episode of the podcast, you can click right there. As always, thank you for your time and know your gear.